Kate, we're delighted to have you with us here to discuss Inside Qatar World Cup Series. I've listened to the first episode. I haven't got all the way through it yet, Kate, so I do apologize for that. But oh my, you blew me away with the first one. Some of the interviews, some of the people you were speaking to, it's been quite amazing. So thank you so much for getting into it. But the first question I have for you is, you've lived in Qatar for a couple of years. What was it like living over there for you personally?
I found it to be quite a strange experience, as an opener. I mean, I moved out there, in 2017. So I was there from 2017 to 2019. And I think I was pretty open-minded about heading out there. Like, I didn't know a lot about the Middle East. I was pretty excited to be somewhere that I knew was going to host the World Cup in what would have been 5 years at that point. So yeah, I think I just went out there to work and to see the place and to understand how somewhere like that could be hosting the biggest sporting event in the world, right? And I think I was out there on my own, like as in without a partner or like without a family. And actually, I think that's something that makes a big difference in Qatar, because many people who are out there are there and live in kind of compounds and are there with their whole family. And it's a very safe place in the sense that, like, kids are very well looked after, and it's very family orientated from the perspective of the Qataris. Obviously, we know that there's a huge range of people who are there from all over the world, including thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've been there building the stadiums. And I found it a bit difficult and almost like unpleasant, I guess, the way that the whole of society was organized so separately. So it was very hard to initially meet anybody who was doing anything different to you. Like, there was kind of the Western expats were living all together, and then all the different sectors of society. So I found that a bit odd, and over time I started trying to meet more people from different parts of the world, partly just because it's such an amazing thing to be, I didn't know really anybody from the Middle East until I lived there. So I got to know Jordanians, people from Syria, lots of people who've escaped war-torn parts of the region who've come to Qatar and think of it as this great land of opportunity. So there's such a range of different perspectives there. And that was really, really valuable thing for me as a person to find out more about. And then going into this documentary was the most important thing, I thought, was to be able to ask these people exactly what their perspective is on the place, because Qataris only make up 10% of the population of Qatar. It's mad if you think that effectively 350,000 Qataris have brought the whole world to their country.
Wild.
It's bizarre. Wild. So the population is 3 million, but there's only this tiny little population of genuine citizens, if you like. And it's impossible to become a citizen of Qatar, even if you like married into a Qatari family, which would be quite unlikely to happen. You don't get to become a citizen. So it's a very tiny little unit, and they're the bosses.
Yeah, this Qatar's rise to being sort of a major player in the footballing world has been fascinating, and obviously for me, covering PSG close up since the takeover back in 2011, it really has been sort of phenomenal to see how that influence has grown. But I'm not going to beat about the bush. There's obviously been a lot of discussion since the beginning of the tournament and the days leading up to it, about sort of FIFA's role in some of the sort of promises that were made before the tournament, certainly in terms of like the fan experience. I mean, do you feel that the finger of blame should perhaps be pointed more towards them in terms of some of the maybe misunderstandings that there were, or misgivings before the tournament? I'm talking about stuff like the fans going there expecting to be able to drink and then suddenly finding out that they couldn't last minute, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, part of me has, I know this is a little bit sadistic, but part of me has quite enjoyed seeing FIFA being given the runaround by Qatar, because my experience day to day of Qatar bureaucracy and like the many hoops you had to jump through to get anything done, and the absolute control that the Qatar state kind of has on everybody in the country. You remember, of course, there was the thing in the Brazil World Cup where it was like, oh, you're not going to be able to drink. Oh, okay, FIFA put their foot down. There was a change to how booze was handled in stadiums. So it has been kind of fascinating to see that Qatar has managed to outmaneuver FIFA by sheer kind of, you're in our country and this is the deal. It's I don't know where they go from here. I guess it's a funding thing, right? They've just got so much. The GDP per capita of Qatar is bigger than anywhere else in the world, and we know that about FIFA, you know, money talks. So it'll be interesting to see what the next steps are, particularly in the context of that booze thing, because, you know, the Budweiser, presumably, I haven't followed what's happened next with Budweiser, but presumably, you know, you make these changes to your commercial relationships. These are things that are pretty established, and you don't want to be messing around with them. The other thing that hasn't really surprised me, although I did expect them to just kind of turn into something like a theme park that didn't much look like Qatar for the course of the World Cup, is some of the people having their like rainbow flags and or even just rainbow hats confiscated. I assume the approach tends to be, when something plays out in a way that is embarrassing for like the Qatar government, tends to be that they will say, oh yeah, these were just one or two people and they got it wrong and they were just, you know, like doing their own thing. And I don't know why they did that. Whereas it seems to have been like, oh yeah, this kind of is policy. Tough. So yeah, it's been interesting to see someone like FIFA go up against this kind of intractable Qatar state.
Yeah, Kate, I was a little bit intrigued. I had the chance also to play, you know, to work over there on TV for a month, a couple of times on beIN Sports. And of course, I was surrounded. There's been a lot of talks about how women is being treated there, how they are in the different situations there as a foreigner living there. How did you feel? How was your day by day? Because I didn't even have a chance to see a lot of people working where I was working. It was all about football players or former football players arriving to studios and in and out. So not much. Of course, I saw women on malls and stuff. But for you as a foreigner, how was your day by day?
Yeah, really good question, Luis. And I think that's your experience is a very common one. And I think lots of people who have subsequently been more like, many people have very positive experiences working in that setup for Qatar, and quite, you know, you can understand why, because often, you know, you get the red carpet rolled out for you and you're not there for very long and fine. You're there to do a job. In terms of being female, the thing is, I think it's an intersectional thing. Like, I always felt that being British, I was quite well protected by the British Embassy and the support that I potentially had, just from the fact that Britain is like a partner of Qatar, and there's a historical, as we know, kind of colonial relationship, I guess, there. So for me, I found some of the conventions around, like, for example, I would go to interview somebody and I would go, let's say, with like a junior production assistant and a cameraman, and it would be a man almost always who I was interviewing, and they would sort of be slapping each other's backs and like having a great time and being best friends, and then they wouldn't shake hands with me or even like acknowledge me. And some of that, you know, they say it's like a religion thing, and I'm not here to question people's conventions and religious beliefs. That's fine.
Sometimes it's just a culture thing as well, though, right, Kate?
That's true, but equally it does, you know, when you're making a relation, a lot of reporting and any of this stuff is like about building relationships. And so if we had it, in fact, I think we put it in I can't remember which episode it would be, but we went to meet one of the guys who was one of the Qataris who's in charge of one of the stadiums. And he said the whole thing about not wanting to shake my hand because I wasn't his family member. And I was sort of like, fine. And then I knew about that. And he was like, it's because I'm showing you respect. And like, I think sometimes the way to show, or always the way to show someone respect, is to ask them how they would feel respected, right? So yeah, I didn't always feel respected by people I was working with, but you know, I tried to deal with that as best I could. What I would say is, though, female workers were very, very vulnerable when they were from places like the Philippines, for example, or if they were working. One of the people we spoke to from Amnesty said that they were particularly concerned about those workers from that part of the world in the country, because quite often they'd be working in the homes like as maids, and there's a whole system with kafala, the way that the employment works. Like you arrive, your employer is responsible for you, they take your passport. Now, you know, there's all sorts of discussion about how far that's been broken down now, but in terms of people, you know, living in homes, I've spoken to plenty of people who have had very difficult situations with that. I even know someone who, you know, ended up getting out, running away from her employer in order to just like get out of that toxic situation. So I think it's a lot more dependent on your nationality, probably my experience of it, than gender. And there are also like some hugely powerful female Qataris, you know, Sheikha Moza, who's responsible for Qatar Foundation, which is the kind of cultural outreach part of the Qatar state. So those people have a huge amount of power, although often they are like married to, in her case, Father Emir, the guy who was the Emir before the current Emir. So yeah, I mean, I found it a difficult place to work, as I say, in terms of building those relationships. But then I guess in the end, you know, I had some wonderful benefits in the sense that I was able, like the first episode opens with me watching this supposed women's Qatar national team, which is basically a fiction, as we discover, that was set up for the bid, so they could say, you know, oh look, we got the women's, you know, we're great, and they haven't played since 2015. But I was able to go in there and like see a league, like a domestic, kind of made again like a small little domestic league, and have a kickabout, whereas no guys were able to go in there because it's, you know, the whole pitch is covered and there's like 2 female security guards on the gate. So I feel like I was very lucky in the range of people I was able to speak to, partly out of curiosity and just wanting to learn about the place and the geographical region. But in some ways, yeah, I felt like my gender actually was helpful, because lots of people weren't actually asking these people anything about themselves at all.
Some great questions and really, really interesting answers. And at the risk of incurring the wrath of producer Des by asking you another question, Kate, I'm really curious about the sort of dynamic that we see in the stands at the moment. Obviously, we've seen like you know, Qatari higher ups celebrating Saudi Arabia beating Argentina, that sort of stuff. Yeah. But we also knew that Qatar, you know, was quite an embattled state, sort of in the years building up to the World Cup, not getting on that well with certain neighbors. Obviously, there's always been that friction with the Saudis, for example. Do you feel like what we're seeing now is genuinely sort of like a thawing of the relationships between some of these countries, or is this kind of superficial and designed just to sort of aid the image of the World Cup?
Oh my goodness, what a fascinating question. Yeah, when I was there, like just after I arrived in 2017, this blockade between Saudi and their kind of a group of the nations around that region stopped having trade with Qatar, closed the borders, and there was this idea that there were like I think it was a list of 12 demands that had to be met, and then they would start treating Qatar differently again. And they said that Al Jazeera, so the kind of the journalism or the really impressive TV journalists center in Qatar, of which beIN Sports is a part, that they were, the phrase was something like sports terrorists. So it was a really like quite extreme exchange between these countries about what was going on. There was this a suggestion that they were going to fill the gap between, so it's a peninsula, Qatar, you know, it projects out off Saudi Arabia effectively geographically. They were going to fill the gap, the border, with nuclear waste. So all of this stuff is like pretty extreme conversations about different nations, and so for them to then be bonding again, it's hard to tell how sincere it is. I mean, I think what a lot of that was from is the idea that Qatar, tiny little Qatar, sitting out there, the little brother, if you like, who hadn't been able to be dominant in the region, was becoming this dominant force, and indeed had managed to get the World Cup. And we now hear that Saudi Arabia is going to be having the World Cup in future, or plans to, or let's see what happens. So I guess it seems as though, depending on what happens next, Qatar's approach to geopolitics in the region seems to have been quite successful, and if anything, Saudi is now taking a very similar approach. We'll see.
I'll tell you what, Kate, listening to your voice and the way you explain it was fascinating to me. I was trying to picture a lot of things as you were explaining it, and you were interviewing certain people, especially in that first episode when you're talking about the young girls and having to cover and wearing the hijab and having the soccer fields being covered. It was really, really fascinating, and I'm really excited to listen to the rest of the stuff. So can you just let everybody else out there who's watching and know where they can find it and where they can listen to it?
Oh, thank you so much, Ian. Yeah, so it's called Inside the Qatar World Cup. There's 3 episodes, and if you Google the Football Ramble feed, so that's like our parent podcast. So wherever you get your podcast, you should be able to find it. Also, or you can, I'm at KVL Mason. That's my Twitter thing. So I've been putting up all of the episodes. So yeah, there's 3 episodes, and they'll all be on there. Oh, Rafa likes the football ramble too. Thanks,
Super.
Rafa.
Honestly, it's great stuff. I mean, just fascinating stuff. And we're actually really proud to have you on the show with us as well for the great job and great work that you do. So thanks for coming on.